My name's Amanda Kenzie, and I'll change my name on the Zoom here in a moment. At the moment, I am the chair of the Southwest chapter, but I'm actually transitioning out of this role, and we have our new chair with us here tonight. So without further ado, I want to introduce Kenner. Kenner, do you want to unmute and introduce yourself, say a few words?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everybody. My name is Kenner Houghton. I moved to Durango about a year ago now for a job with the U.S. Forest Service. So I'm currently working as an environmental coordinator at the Columbine District Office for the San Juan National Forest. And I'm also the new chapter chair. I'm taking over for Amanda so she has some more time with her kiddo. I'm a bit new to it, but I'm really excited to just work on projects with everyone and continue getting us involved in some amazing stuff here in the Southwest region. I'm going to drop my email in the chat in case anyone has any questions or needs anything. But I'm really excited to be here. And I just want to thank Renee Rondu for also joining us and giving us this presentation today.
Thank you so much, Kenner. So I will say that I'm going to try to keep being the person that helps to line up the speakers for this lecture series. I just looked at our CONIPS calendar, and it seems I have not made the event live, my mistake, for February yet, but I do want to mention that the February lecture is going to be on February 8th. So I was trying to stick with first Thursday of the month, but somehow we got off track and got some of them on the second Thursdays. So February 8th will be our next one. I will get that live ASAP so people can start to register. And the speaker is going to be our member, Karen Wong, who is writing a field guide to the Durango area, a botanical field guide. And she's been working on that for a while. And a few of you might have been on some of the hikes that she led last summer to show us some of the areas that she's explored to do her research for that. And so for tonight, I would love to introduce Renee Rondu, and I'm gonna, Rondeau, sorry, I just said it wrong. And she has been working with the Colorado Natural Heritage Program since 1992 and has collected field data throughout Colorado. If anyone here tonight is a longtime member of our chapter, you might remember we had Renee, I'm not sure how many years ago, give a presentation on this research. So at least I remember being there at her talk years ago. So this is an update to all of this fantastic work they've been doing. And I will go ahead and hand it over. Thank you for being here.
All right. Thanks, Amanda. Thanks, Maggie. Thanks, Kenneth. This is fantastic. Well, welcome everybody. What a delight. And I can't see everybody that's on the call, but I know there's a couple folks on the call that actually have collected Chapin Mesa Milkvetch data. I saw Dave Anderson is there. Tova might be there. I think Sage might be joining. So there's a couple folks, and there's other folks. It's so nice to have folks that have actually worked on this. So my name is the name on this presentation, but really I'm just one of the messengers. So what I'm sharing today is really I'm following in the footsteps of some amazing botanists. And with that, we'll get started. And let me see if I can move this little thing so I can see better. All right. So tonight, what we're going to talk about is Chapin Mesa Milkvetch. The Latin name for that is Astragalus schmollii. And we'll get into why it's named Astragalus schmollii in a bit. So we'll touch on the life history, trend data, and management in old growth Pinion-Juniper, this plant, which you can see right here. A National Park Service technician is counting plants, and there was a lot of it. That's 2019 photo, and this is a view of Mesa Verde, and it's this plant, its primary habitat is old growth Pinion-Juniper. And so we'll get quite familiar with this plant as we go through this. And see if I can do one more thing. Get this little bar out. Okay, so Mesa Verde National Park is where it takes place. That's the only place it grows Mesa Verde National Park, and south of Mesa Verde National Park is Ute Mountain Ute tribal land. And it's really primarily on one mesa top. So Mesa Verde National Park is where I do all of the work. And this is a photo of Mesa Verde National Park. And if you haven't been there, it's in the extreme southwest corner of Colorado. And when we look at this photo, it's well named Mesa. We can see a lot of mesas here. It's mesas and canyons, cliff and canyons and mesas. And Verde is green, and it's green because of all the pinyon and juniper trees, which stay green year round. And so what we're looking at is a canyon here. This is actually Chapin Mesa right here. This is, we're going to talk a lot about this mesa here. And this park was set aside on June 29th, 1906 by President Teddy Roosevelt. And he set it aside to preserve the works of man. That's a cultural park. And it was the first national park that was a cultural park. And it was really set aside. You can see these cliff dwellings here. And that is what caught people's attention. And it was the ancestral Puebloans that inhabited Mesa Verde for more than 700 years, from 550 AD to 1300 AD. And currently, Mesa Verde is known to have over almost 5,000 archaeological sites, including 600 cliff dwellings. And the mesa top, so this is why people come, is to look at these cliff dwellings. It's just amazing. But it was only out of those 700 years that the ancestral Puebloans were occupying this area and living here, it was only the last 100 to 150 years that these cliff dwellings were part of their society. Prior to that, all of the habitation, all of the living was up on the mesa top. And they lived in these pit houses. There's a diorama of a pit house. And so they would dig into the mesa top, deep, loamy soil, and have the dwellings on top of the mesa top, because they're at that point, they're agricultural, they're growing beans, squash, corn, also using pinyon nuts, all the resources there, also hunter-gatherers, right? So that's where we're at. So this has had a lot of people on the mesa top and within Mesa Verde National Park. So prior to it becoming a park, Alice Eastwood was collecting plants at what is now called Mesa Verde. In fact, we know she was collecting plants on Chapin Mesa because she was the first one to collect Astragalus schmollii in 1890, so prior to the park being a park. It was misidentified as Astragalus coltonii, and the specimen also has Onchocarpus on it. And so it sat there for a while as Astragalus coltonii, and then Hazel Schmoll, and as Al Schneider so well said in his wonderful website, called the Southwest Colorado Wildflowers website, he really dives into Hazel Schmoll, Alice Eastwood, and now Ava Nelson, who also collected Astragalus schmollii in 1925, just a few weeks prior to when Hazel Schmoll collected it. So thank you, Al, for providing that information. I highly recommend visiting that website if you haven't yet. So Hazel Schmoll collected it, sat there. Also, even Nelson collected it, sat there. And then in 1945, C.L. Porter actually named and described it, and he described it after Hazel Schmoll. And for what of interest, Hazel went on to become the first woman graduate with a doctorate at University of Chicago, lived in Colorado, and her ranch near Ward, Colorado was donated to conservation, and is now the Eco-Dharma Center adjacent to Rocky Mountain National Park. So these are the folks that actually first collected it, and those specimens are in herbaria, and we are so grateful to have these folks that collected it, because it's important. We can tell a lot from those specimens now that we know what I'm about to share with you. Okay, this is what I look like out in the field. And once I got this picture of Alice Eastwood, I thought, oh, maybe I should take some lessons. I think Alice Eastwood's collecting outfit is a little nicer than my collecting outfit, but we'll leave it at that. So before I dive into Chapin Mesa Milkvetch, I thought I'd share with you, there's 3 other endemic species to this mesa. There's what we call our crack specialist, Aletes mcdouglii, and it grows in these cracks. It's right here, and again, it's pretty much found at Mesa Verde National Park and Mountain Ute tribal land. And we have our Cliff Palace Milkvetch rimrock specialist. You can see this is a rimrock. These are the canyons. So this is the top of the canyon. This is this rimrock, very shallow soil. This is a short-lived species with a short root. And we do have some trend data on this, and it looks like it has been declining. It looks like it's incredibly vulnerable to climate change. We also have the Mesa Verde stick seed, Hakelia gracilenta. It's a short-lived cliff and canyon specialist. Instead of growing in the cracks of these rocks, it actually grows at the base of these boulders. It's often right at the base of cliff dwellings. It's pretty common to find that. And we don't know much about the trend of this one either, but it is short-lived, annual, biennial. Monsoons are when it, good monsoon seasons, summer season rain is when it germinates. Seems to be doing okay. So all of these are limited in distribution, but locally common at Mesa Verde. So again, the world's distribution for those 3 species and Astragalus schmollii, it's right here in Southwest Colorado. Pretty small footprint. So let me introduce you to the star of our show tonight, Astragalus schmollii, Chapin Mesa Milkvetch. It is a deep-rooted, long-lived mesatop specialist. So this is Chapin Mesa Milkvetch in its glory, and it doesn't look like this every year. This happened to be after our 2019 winter, which was very wet. And this is actually not one plant, but 3 plants. This is one individual, here's another individual, here's another individual. So they can be very close together, but we can tell individuals apart. What's going on are these stems here die back every year. After they've come up, they die back in the wintertime, and they start over again the next spring, right? And so these stems are arising from this codex here, what we call a codex. And so this codex is under the ground here. It's buried about 5 to 10 centimeters deep. And all of those stems are rising from this codex. And we know that it's long-lived. And many of the first folks to actually look at this plant recognized that it was long-lived, but we were guessing as to how long it was, how old it was, could get to be. And it turns out that if we can take this codex here and we can take a cookie out of it, just like you do a tree, and you can actually age this codex. And so when we take these cookies here, it has basically tree rings, but these are taproot rings. And it turns out this plant, which was salvaged because they were doing some work to expand the bathroom on Chapin Mesa. And so we've salvaged any plants that are going to be killed from infrastructure. This is one of them. And it turned out this was the oldest one. I had 50 plants that, 50 plants that we scored. And it turns out this is 50 years old. It had 50 rings. So it definitely is a long-lived herbaceous plant that can die back. It looks like it's almost dead every winter. This on the right-hand side is actually the root system. So this is like codex. Here's this green stems coming up. And this is, you see the secondary roots. These are the roots that are actually collecting that soil moisture. And these are about 2 feet down. Super important. It's not collecting any moisture along this taproot until it gets to about 2 feet down. And that is a really good strategy for this plant. So this caudix and this long root system is a strategy that helps it with fires and drought. It's also an insect pollinator. So these are large bees are common. Large digger bees are commonly pollinating this plant, but there are other species that pollinate it. It's not just a bee, but this is probably the most common pollinator. So again, deep-rooted, long-lived mesa top specialist. So here's a little history because we've been paying attention to this plant for a long time. 1979, 1980, Joseph Friedlander was a master's student at CSU. He collected the first population estimate. He estimated 2 million plants at Mesa Verde National Park. Amazing. That's a lot of plants given that it's a small mesa. 1980, 2000, Marilyn Collier, natural resources specialist at Mesa Verde, amazing woman. She collected plot data that Friedlander had set up. So she collected 3 of Friedlander's permanent plots from 1980 to 2000. So there's a nice data set there from her. 1996, Lisa Floyd Hanna, an amazing Pinion-Juniper woodland specialist. She located new populations and collected plot data on Park Mesa following 1996 fire. She's done a lot at Mesa Verde. Can't say enough about her. 2001, Dave Anderson, who I saw is on the call. Thank you, Dave. Just an amazing guy here, amazing botanist. He is also the director of the Heritage Program now. I think probably many people know Dave. He collected the second population estimate. 294,500 individuals is what he estimated after all of the work that he did out there. That's approximately 1/6 of what Friedlander's population estimate was. This might be alarming. So the question becomes, is that a true trend? Are both estimates right? Why 2 million plants and why 300,000 in 2001? We'll get into that and we'll be able to answer that in a bit. 2003, then a gap, and then 2011 to 2022, Dave Anderson and myself and others resampled 38 of Dave's original 168 transects that he did in 2001. And we've kept that going. And then in 2020, 2021, Ross McCulley from Fort Lewis College, amazing geneticist. He's assessed the genetics and found it to be a solid species, most closely related to Astragalus coultonii. Remember that? Alice Eastwood had Astragalus coultonii as a potential for that plant that she collected. It's very closely related. 2015, 2023, I come into the picture here. I set up 20 demography plots that allow us to understand trend data more specifically and capture some environmental factors such as soil and temperature, soil moisture and temperature. And I've also resampled, with the help of many people, resampled all of Dave's original transects. I'll show you what that looks like in a second. So again, this plant, Astragalus schmollii, Chapin Mesa milkvetch, this is a 1-year-old plant here, is found, primary habitat is this old growth Pinion-Juniper. This is a pinion seedling. And so it's, while we've got a lot of data on this plant, while we collect the data on this plant, we can't help but learn something about the Pinion-Juniper woodland. So what can this rare Chapin Mesa milkvetch tell us about a PJ environment? It's a wonderful PJ, short for Pinion-Juniper, if you're not familiar with that. So it tells us a lot about soil heterogeneity. We've learned a lot because of Chapin Mesa milkvetch. We've learned a lot about the impact from seasonal precipitation, especially winter versus summer. our two main primary seasons for moisture. Importance of shade, changes in dominant grasses and shrubs over a 20-year time frame. And it's helping us generate some post-fire restoration ideas. So we'll share all of that with you. So this map is a map of Chapin Mesa. And it's if you're not used to looking at an aerial photo, it can be a little disturbing, but this is the red polygon here outlines the actual distribution for Chapin Mesa Milkvetch. This is over here in the corner. This is actually Chapin Mesa. This is Mesa Verde National Park. And this is Chapin Mesa Milkvetch. And it continues on south of the park. This is Ute Mountain Ute. It continues down this mesa top, and it does end at the end of the mesa. We know that, even though we don't have a really good estimate of the number of individuals down here. It is a healthy population, we know that. So what we're looking at here this is Chapin Mesa here, and this is a road. You go visit the Cliff Palace, Spruce Tree House, Balcony House, a lot of those famous cliff dwellings that you can get tours of. This is the road you're going to take. So this is the mesa top that road goes on, goes out to the rim. And what we see here is the other thing I want to point out, these black lines with these little dots. This is what Dave Anderson set up in 2001. And what Mesa Verde asked him, hey, can you do an assessment, get a population estimate, and tell us something about how well is Chapin Mesa Milkvetch doing, right? So what he did was he set up these these transects that go across the mesa top. So this is a cliff edge right here. This is a canyon down here. So it goes from cliff edge to cliff edge. And each one of these dots represents the beginning or the end of a transect. A transect is 100 meters long, and it's 10 meters wide. It's what we call a belt transect. And he counted all the plants within the belt transects across this mesa top. It's 168 transects is what this comes out to. And from that, you can see there's different colors, different shades of green here, and that denotes the density. And so it's not evenly distributed across Chapin Mesa. And what we see is the darker greens are the higher density areas, and the light greens are the low density areas. So we can see the northern part, this is as far north as it gets. This is just a couple miles long. The northern part has a real light density. It's light green is light density. And so it's low density up north, high density down south. And then you see a strong gradient from east to west, and really dense as you get closer to the cliff edges. It's quite dense, and right on the mesa tops, it's there, but it's not very dense. This is where a lot of the pit houses are also. It's right here because it's really deep soil. So that's what this map is showing us. And so that's that. It gives us something to say about soil heterogeneity is what's going on here. And so the mesa top this mesa top right here has really deep, dense clay soil, really slow infiltration. When I say slow infiltration, just think about taking a ring about the size of a pot that you would boil water in, cut out the bottom, pour a liter of water in it, and count how many minutes it takes for that water to be absorbed by the soil. And on the mesa top here, some of these sites are taking about an hour, 45 minutes or so for the soil to get moist from that liter of water. So that's what we call a slow infiltration rate. We also sent soil samples to CSU, and we found out that these are really low organic matter here. Very few rock fragments, really hard to dig in. And we also know from soil moisture sensors that the deep soils where the secondary roots are for Chapin Mesa Milkvetch are actually drier here than it is here, right? So it's picking up moisture. And so on the flip side, the high density areas are close to the cliff edges, where the soil is not as deep. It's still 2 feet deep. It's still deep, but not as deep. It's really fast infiltration rates. That 1 liter of water would disappear in 7 to 10 minutes, right? Really high organic matter. And the soils are wetter at 35 centimeter depth where those secondary roots are. So that's a snapshot of where these plants are growing and how it changes across the mesa top. And so if you're going to get trend data, you actually have to know, is there a different trend up here where it's really low density, or is there a different trend here? And so we've set it up so that we capture all those gradients. Wet winters are really critical for this plant. It emerges in the spring, especially after wet winters. And so this is what we call our poker plot. It's also kind of a mark recapture plot. These poker chips are marking Chapin Mesa Milkvetch, and the red denotes it's a mature plant that flowers and fruits. Green is a 1-year-old, blue is an immature, and you don't see, I have one other color, white. It's not in this photo, but that denotes a seedling. And so this is a transect that we have. It's a permanent transect. There's a rebar here. It's 50 meters long, 1 meter wide on either side. And we count all the plants and within this transect. But right here, this poker plot allows us to follow these plants over time and know how long a seedling takes before it flowers, etc. So it gives us a lot of information. So this is what it looks like after a pretty wet winter. And then we had a dry winter, a very dry winter in 2018. It was about 40% of our average winter moisture. And so this is the same place. I'm standing in the same place when I take this photo, and I'm only a couple days off. This is January 27th, and this is February 1st. So not a lot of snow. And this is what that same poker plot looks like with after a dry winter. And so one might say, well, there's a trend, right? You had all these plants here and now you have 0, right? And did they die? What happened, right? They're just not there. So it could be that they died. But because we follow them, the next year, they're back, right? And and not only that, but now we have a couple seedlings, these white poker chips. So 2019 was a very wet winter also, where people around Durango and the southwest corner got sore backs from shoveling so much snow. And so they're back. So this gives us an idea that what's going on is this plant can go dormant. It can go dormant if it doesn't have enough winter moisture. Enough soil moisture is what it is. Soil moisture, but it's winter driving it. And that is a big piece of the puzzle. If you want to know about trend here, you have to understand that it can go dormant. And the plants can go dormant for multiple years, actually. One plant went dormant for 4 years, but most plants are either just 1 or 2 years they go dormant. And so with that information, what we did is we resampled a lot of Dave's transects, and this is 14 years worth of data, resampling a subsample of Dave's transects. And what we've got here, this is median density for these transects. And you can see the median density in 2014, 2018 is close to 0, really low. And 2019, it's quite high, 0.18. And what it is down here, I've got deviation from 1971, 2000. So this is a 30-year winter precipitation average. And it is fascinating to see that there's a really good correlation. When it's dry winters, nothing emerges. And when it's really above average, we get high numbers. And so if you remember right, Friedlander estimated 2 million individuals. Dave Anderson estimated 300, about 300,000, about a sixth of what of Friedlander. And so there was this big question, like when that first came to light, Dave Anderson is like, oh my gosh, is there a downward trend, or maybe Friedlander actually didn't had a different method, and maybe his counts were wrong, or maybe my counts are wrong. Well, it turns out that Friedlander, when he was there for his master's, he actually was in a very wet period. I don't have his point on here, but he had over 100% above average winter precipitation right before he measured, and so there was a lot of plants. And it turns out his median density was 0.2, totally within the realm of possibility. Dave, when he did his count, that's right, it's this dot right here. This is 2001. Dave did it, it was about 20-25% below average winter precip. So Dave, there were no seedlings out there. Dave counted a lot fewer plants than Friedlander did. But once we have this regression model here, we can pretty much state that most likely there was no trend between what Friedlander got and what Dave Anderson got, in spite of the fact that there's a big discrepancy in the number of counts. And so when we go to get trend data, it's really important that we understand the life history strategy that these plants are doing. So this was a really important piece of the puzzle here. So again, the importance of precipitation, that's seasonal precipitation. Winter snow replenishes that deep soil moisture, and the monsoon moisture seldom replenishes deep soil. I've got this is a Pinion seedling here. It's a pretty young, couple years old. And you can see a very different root system than Chapin Mesa Milkvetch, right? So Pinion pines have shallow roots and really deep roots. And so Pinion pines can take advantage of both winter and summer moisture because they have two different kinds of roots. And Chapin Mesa Milkvetch does not have any shallow roots, so it can only take into account this deep soil moisture. And so what I'm going to show you is we've placed these soil moisture sensors out there. This is one plot worth of data. This is soil moisture water content on the y-axis. This is saturated up here. 50% is a saturated soil. And this is over time, months 2015 through 2021. And this is one soil moisture sensor. And this is at the 35 centimeter depth. And you can see a pattern here. It's a pretty strong pattern. There's peaks. This is almost saturated, almost, pretty wet. And this happens to always be almost the beginning of spring, but this happened to peak in mid-February. This is peaking also in February. This is a March, peaking in March. So soil moisture, peak soil moisture is somewhere between the 15th of February and 15th of March every year. And check this out. There's no peak here. This is our 2018 drought. And so that soil moisture, this plant is really picking up on this. And so those dry years that nothing comes in, this is bone dry. This is like cement when it's this low. And my soil moisture sensor busted right there. So there's no data right where I wanted it, of course. So this is the deep one, right? And then here's a shallow one. This is 10 centimeters deep. We put this in to get at seedlings, and it has that same pattern. But I'm going to point something out here. We get some October, we get some fall moisture, and you can see this deep soil moisture doesn't even respond to that moisture, even though the plants aren't photosynthesizing as much. It's still not enough. So again, the only thing that replenishes this deep soil moisture here is winter moisture. The monsoons, this Chapin Mesa Milkvetch, for what we can tell, just doesn't really pay attention to the monsoons, even the seedlings. By the time the seedlings are in the monsoons, they've got a deep root already. Okay, so finally, let's dive in and let's see what it looks like. This is an old growth Pinion-Juniper, typical for Mesa top at Mesa Verde. This is one of our transects. All these pink flags are marking Chapin Mesa Milkvetch. This is bitterbrush, some pinions, some dead down pinion trees. Junipers in here, but pretty rich. There's not very many grasses in here. The grass cover here, often 10 to 15%, real diverse shrub. Sometimes there's yucca, cactus, etc. So that's what that looks like. But then something happens. So remember, Dave collected his population estimate in 2001. Then we had a drought that winter following Dave's estimate. And on July 29th through August 2nd, 2002, which is a serious drought, a lightning strike started a fire at Chapin Mesa. And in spite of the fact that it's called Long Mesa Fire, it occurred on Chapin Mesa. 2,600 acres burned, and it included 40% of Chapin Mesa Milkvetch, the population within the national park. So quite a bit. And this is Dave's photo. He took it 1 year after the fire. This is from 2003, and this is Chapin Mesa Milkvetch, and pretty burned up. So this became an opportunity for us to answer that question: how well does Chapin Mesa Milkvetch do after a fire? Because we knew it was going to happen, and it did happen. And so now we have this opportunity to see if fires are beneficial to it or not, right? So it turns out that it's highly adapted to surviving fires. It's that caudix, that underground caudix. It had not even sprouted that year, so it was underground when the fire started. No stems were above ground. I don't think it would have made much difference. But the plants survived, and it looks like all the plants are pretty much most of the plants survived that hot fire. Good regeneration, I'll show you that in a second, and low mortality from that fire. But what about now, right? Does trend differ in what burned in 2002 versus what we call the intact or unburned system? So this is what it looks like, thanks to Dave's great photography work here. We see that the dominant plant that was there after the burn is Chapin Mesa Milkvetch, common, and it was common after the burn. And well, Dave had a lot blackened face while he collected this information and got these photos. It's really, really important information. What we have here, these pink flags all here, these are all seedlings. He marked all the seedlings in one little spot. There was this huge regeneration. So these seeds, we also found out, these seeds survived the fire. These seedlings came from the plants from the previous year or some other previous years, maybe decades, who knows, and they sprouted that year in 2003. And that is our saving grace, that they sprouted, and not only that, but many of them survived. And then the park and the archaeologists were concerned about the erosion and weeds, etc. And so there was a post-fire seeding 1 year after the fire. 5 native bunch grasses, slender wheatgrass, sandbird bluegrass, Indian rice grass, mutton grass, squirrel tail, were in the seed mix, all grasses. And then there was also one, what I call kind of native, rhizomatous grass, which is western wheatgrass, Pascopyrum smithii, was in the seed mix. And out of all of these, this one had the lightest seed mix. There just weren't that many seeds in that mix, but they were seeded. It was done aerial seeding, and not every place was seeded, but much of it was, but not all of it. And so I'm going to walk you through what happened. What happens after the fire? So we're going to now focus on post-fire succession. And so we call this the annual stage. It lasts for 2 to 13 years. It turns out the annual stage here, this is cheatgrass, right? This is Astragalus schmollii struggling to get above the cheatgrass. It was amazing amount of cheatgrass. This is 9 years after the fire, still a lot of cheatgrass. This is 13 years after the fire. This is a plot that Dave set up in 2003, Sun Temple. all of this is cheatgrass. But look, the Stragula schmollii is still there. Is doing all those pink flags are Stragula schmollii, doing well. And then we have this what turns into perennial grass forb shrub stage, and it's 13 to 17 years post fire. This is what it looks like. These are some bunch grasses here coming in, Stragula schmollii. Not there's some cheatgrass, but the cheatgrass looks like it's reduced, right? And this is 15 years post fire. Not as much cheatgrass. Some shrubs are coming in. I'm gonna get back to that, but brief interlude. We have a monitoring design, what we call for demography plots. So we took a subsample of Dave's original transects, made them permanent transects with rebar that I showed you earlier. We have 11 burned, 11 unburned, a balanced design. We have 50 by 2 meter transects. We have 6 soil temperature sensors in the burned, 6 in the unburned. We count the number of individuals. We score them by their age class, from seedlings to 1-year-olds to immatures to adults. We count number of flowers. We count number of fruits. We count number of stems. We count the browsing. It's pretty intense. We also do a line point intercept and get cover for cheatgrass and western wheatgrass. And in 2023, we collected what I call functional group cover. We collected the cover for shrubs, grasses, and forbs. And you'll see how that gets used here. And then, of course, we have those poker plots or marker capture plots that give us a lot about dormancy rates that is so important for capturing trend. It also tells us that these plants to go from seedling to actually a flower is taking 10 years before they start to flower, which is pretty slow. And when they do start to flower and fruit, they look like a teenager. They hardly have anything going on. Okay, so let's just look at the grass cover trend for cheatgrass and western wheatgrass. So this is a graph. This is percent cover over here. And here are the different years. And we can see cheatgrass peaks right about here. This is 2015. Bernadette Kuhn set some plots up in 2011, also with the Heritage Program at that point. And she got this estimate in 2011, 45% cover of cheatgrass. And in 2022, pretty good year, it's down to about 10% cover. It's the same this year in 2023, it's about 10% cover. So cheatgrass is just naturally dying out. And you'll see why here in a second. This is certainly one of the reasons. Western wheatgrass, again, it was seeded, but at a very low rate. So in 2011, it was less than 10% cover. And currently it's at about 30% cover, and it just keeps going up every year. So keep that in mind. So this is what it looks like when I'll just walk you through a quick summary of what infilling does with western wheatgrass. This is all about western wheatgrass here. 2019, this plot had 36% western wheatgrass. 2022, 62% western wheatgrass. If you look straight down at one of these poker plots, it starts to fill in. So this is a transformation from a Pinion-Juniper woodland to a grassland, basically, and not super desirable. So here's another set here, just looking at how this works from a successional standpoint of view. Here's an annual stage. This is our cheatgrass stage. All the pink flags are Stragula schmollii. And then this is 2016, 1 year after this. There's actually some shrubs. You're starting to see shrubs coming in. There's not as much cheatgrass. And here's 15 years, is 2017. Look at all these shrubs, right? Amazing. All of a sudden, they're just taking off. 1 year later, no, this is 2022. So this is 20 years post-fire. And look at this. This is all the same. This is the same plot, right? And so now we have a lot of shrubs. Now it's actually quite hard for us to string our tape up. And that looks like a saving grace that we're getting these shrubs in. Soil moisture sensors here are buried, and we record them. They're recording year round. And what we found is that burned areas are drier and hotter than the unburned areas. Unburned areas are wetter and cooler. And what this looks like for the deep soil moisture sensors, I average it. And so these green bars are the intact woodland, PJ woodland, and the orange bars are the burned area. And if you take a look at this, anytime you see the green bars without the orange bars means it's wetter in the intact PJ woodland, right? And so it doesn't matter what 2018, 2019, 2020, 2020. It's the same pattern. In fact, it looks like it's getting worse. It looks like it's getting drier and hotter over here in the burned. It's just amazing. And so we have temperature sensors also. And those temperature sensors, same time frame. And this is peak. This is always June and July. This is the peak heat here. And because the orange, you're seeing the orange here, it's because it's hotter. It's up to 10 degrees hotter in the middle of the summer in the burned area. And so when people stress that if we got rid of Pinion-Juniper trees, we might get more groundwater, that is a myth. You do not get more groundwater when you get rid of the trees. You have less soil moisture, it's hotter and drier. So springs start to dry up, you start to get this, so we do want trees, we want shrubs, if you want to keep your soil moisture and you want to keep your springs vibrant. Okay, let's switch to what are the changes when we talk about the succession. I just gave you photographic evidence that there's succession going on. Let's talk about it. Dominant grasses, shrubs, and forbs. So we collected this data last year, and we found out that grasses have basically it's a negative response. The stragglers, schmollii, Chapin Mesa milkvetch is responding negatively to grasses. They respond positively to shrubs, and they respond positively when there's high forb cover. So what that looks like, Chapin Mesa milkvetch cannot compete with grasses. It's not a grassland species, and it's really, especially western wheatgrass. That grass has roots that go deep and shallow, so the seedlings can't get established, and the adults can't compete with western wheatgrass. Shrubs provide a refuge for Chapin Mesa milkvetch, and check this out, areas that were not seeded after the 2002 fire have higher shrub and forb cover and lower grass cover than areas that were seeded. So what managers do after a Pinion-Juniper fire can alter the trajectory of succession and thus altering the recovery of Chapin Mesa milkvetch and Pinion-Juniper recruitment. That's a big take-home message, right? What we do after fire matters. So let me just show some data to back those statements up. I'm not going to expand this, but these are seedlings. This is recruitment, right? And so the orange box and whisker plot here are number of seeds for these 11 plots averaged. I think this is 2019 data. A really good seedling year, and this is the intact system. And this little X is average, right? And so there's hardly any seedlings anymore in the burned area. It's really unusual to finally see the seedlings that do come up don't survive. So very low survival rate. So no recruitment virtually. And then this is we're taking 11 plots in the burned, 11 plots in the unburned. And we incorporated that dormancy rate now. Super important. So plants may have been dormant 1 year, but they didn't die, and so they're incorporated into this. So it shows. And so you can see a big discrepancy in 2015. There's quite a few more plants in the burned area, and that's real. That was that flush that we got after that fire, thankfully. So I'm not showing you the data, but I could I could show you the data that if we resample Dave's transects, these would have been right on top of each other. They would have both been down right here, right? But fast forward to 2015, and it's not a doubling, but it's close to a doubling. But look at this trend, right? Versus this. This is a stable, pretty much a stable trend, slight upward trend in the intact unburned Pinion-Juniper woodland. And this is a strong, strong negative trend. 500 plants counted in 2015 in all 11 plots. And it's now below 400. It's now fine. It's back to where it was, right? And so while that sounds good, there's still a lot of plants out there. This trend is alarming. And so if you follow, this is the original response to fire was nearly a doubling of individuals right there. Do that flush of seedlings. This increased population began to die back around 2013, right? Just right before we put the demography plots in. Is when that happened. And by 2021, the burned population is nearly back to the same population size as the intact unburned population. And it's a sharp downward trend. If you follow this line down like this, if it continued at that rate, the burned subpopulation could be approaching extirpation in 15 years from now, by 2037. I personally do not think that's going to happen. It's never going to reach. I don't think it's going to reach zero. It could get pretty low. So we do want to see some pluses here. We want to see a change in trend here. So then we started to get the idea that, wow, maybe shrubs are important here. And so let me explain this graph to you, because you're going to see a couple of these. This is cover over here. This is trend data. This is Chapin Mesa Milkvetch trend data. And that are these bars here. And red means it's a negative trend. So if it's going down, it's a negative trend. If it's going up, these two right here are positive trends. And so these are all the different plots. These are 11 plots. Sun Temple is the only one that has a name instead of a number. That's Dave set this up in 2003. All these other ones were set up in 2015. And so check this out. What do you think about these two here? So what we found out, we know where it was seeded and not seeded. Turns out these two plots were never seeded. So what you see here is has some really high shrub cover. It's 25% shrub cover, which is pretty high actually. And you can put this into a regression and take the same data, just make a regression to see, hey, is there a correlation between shrub cover and Chapin Mesa Milkvetch trend? And there is. The higher the shrub cover, the more likely you are to have a positive trend, right? Same thing with this forbs. We're going to see that same thing. This is forb cover here, and look at pretty low cover, 10, 15, 20%, except for these two plots, right? So these plots, two plots that also have the only plots that have positive trends in the burned, also have really high forb cover. And that regression is also significant. Definitely higher forb cover is correlated with a positive trend. And grass is our last indicator that we're going to look at. It's also a very good indicator, but check this out. Really high cover over here. Our lowest cover of grasses are where we didn't seed. And so that trend is the exact opposite. It's a downward trend, right? As you get higher and higher grass cover, you get a terrible trend for Chapin Mesa Milkvetch. So that trend summary is that 40% of Mesa Verde population of Chapin Mesa Milkvetch is experience a sharp downward trend. The two burned demography plots that had a positive trend also had high shrub cover, high forb cover, and low grass cover. The two areas where Chapin Mesa Milkvetch had a positive trend in the burned area are not seeded, and grasses, especially western wheatgrass, appears to slow down the natural succession rate. So just another way of showing this, this is a stacked bar graph. The bunch grasses are blue. This is what was dominantly in the seed mix, right? It was bunch grasses. Western wheatgrass is this orange, and cheatgrass is this gray. And you can see the two plots that were not seeded. There are some bunch grasses naturally came in. There's no western wheatgrass, and there's still quite a bit of, this is 2023 data. There's quite a bit of cheatgrass still, but cheatgrass is not the bugaboo for Chapin Mesa Milkvetch, which is super interesting to learn. Okay, so we're almost done here. And so Chapin Mesa Milkvetch monitoring has really helped us generate ideas for woody species recovery, these pinions and junipers. And so it is time for us to be seeing pinions and junipers coming in. That would be the natural succession. In fact, it's past time. And so one of the goals would be to restore pinion and junipers post-fire. And the time to start would be now, right? Use existing nurse plants, what I call our shrub plants. So those bitter brushes, even the rabbit brushes that are out there, mountain mahogany. And you plant seeds, which really reduce the cost if you're going to plant seedlings versus seeds, right? You would plant these next to the shrubs, right? Most likely on the north-facing sides. Well, this has to be, we need an experiment with that. Good year coming up for that one. And we want to work in areas where Chapin Mesa Milkvetch is already dense and has very little low western wheatgrass cover, ideally zero, but or very low. And that's a good place to work because we know that it's much more likely to for pinion and juniper to actually take place and actually thrive with that extra soil moisture. So Chapin Mesa Milkvetch is giving us an idea of where the highest soil moisture content is going to be. And definitely want to prioritize areas with low western wheatgrass cover. And post-fire seed mix is super, super, super important. We know that we are going to seed after a fire a lot of times. And so it should be selected to be a climate smart seed mix to encourage the shrub development. We know forbs are there, so putting forbs into that seed mix. Bunch grasses are good and are really important for this area not to be using rhizomatous grass. There's no native rhizomatous grasses up on Chapin Mesa Milkvetch. Go light with the seeding, no reason to go heavy. And in fact, really important, don't think it's necessary to seed everywhere, and maybe it's not even all that important to seed at all. That's a wild idea, probably not going to happen. But what we do after the fire is super important. So I'll end with the last two slides. Oh, look at all these names, the most amazing list of people that have assisted. It's just been an amazing project. There's a lot of names on this. I'm not going to read them all. But a lot of people have helped with what you just saw. And hats off to people out there that have helped with this. A lot of you are on the webinar, so thank you. I'm going to give a special thanks and special shout out to these folks here: Joseph Friedlander, who collected that first population estimate, Lisa Floyd Hanna, an amazing PJ woodland specialist, Marilyn Collier, natural resource specialist at Mesa Verde that knew that park like nobody else. Dave Anderson, we just spent a lot of time talking about his great work. Jill Handwork from the Natural Heritage Program. George San Miguel was with the park, I believe, and he just retired. I think he was with Fish and Wildlife Service when he retired. Not sure about that. Tova Spector with Forest Service was at Mesa Verde. Gordon Rada, my husband, incredible technician when I can't find anybody else. Ross McCulley, who did the genetics work. So I'll end there and open it up to questions. And thank you very much. It's such a delight to share this story with you. I'll hand it back over, maybe Amanda. Not sure how you want to do that.
Sure. Hey, so, and I'm actually multitasking right now as mom at the moment, so
Aw.
it's bedtime. So maybe, yeah, if people can unmute themselves and ask their question, and if people talk over each other, it's okay, that happens. Thank you. I'm gonna kind of sign off. Thank you so much, Renee.
Thanks, Amanda. Good luck with the little one.
Thank you.
Maybe I can check the chat and see if there's any questions in here. Also, I'm doing that. Thank you, Dave. There may be some questions Dave can answer better than I can if Dave's on. I know maybe Tova's on too. Sage might be on. Who knows?
I'm curious what you think about Savannah's question about organic matter.
I cannot see that question.
She asks, what percentages are considered low versus high organic matter on the Mesa top?
Yeah. So high percentage, we have some that are 6.5 to 7% organic matter, which is quite high. Any gardener would love to have that. And the ones that are really low are sitting at about 2% organic matter. What's interesting about that question is why that pattern, and I've asked that. It may have something to do with the slope of the Mesa top. They do slope down towards that cliff edge, but it also may have something to do with the ancestral puebloans. They were growing crops, corn, C4 grass. They pretend, and their pit houses are over there on the middle of the Mesa. Wild idea that potentially that organic matter is really high where the agricultural crops were being grown. It hasn't been tested, but I think we could test it. Thank you, Dave, for helping me with the chat.
Sure. That's a fascinating idea, Renee. It makes me think of those soils in the middle of the Amazon rainforest where they've been enhanced by ancient agriculture.
Yeah. I don't think we can rule that out yet, and I don't think anybody's really thought about that. So Chapin Mesa Milkvetch is giving us that idea. And according to Sasha Reed, she thinks it would be pretty easy to do. I don't know what easy means, but we'd love to know more about how the plant was utilized by the ancestral Puebloans. I expect it was. It's a pretty tasty, the pods are tasty. It's pea pod. I'd be surprised if it was not used. I'd be very surprised, actually.
Hey Renee, this is Nikita Prosser.
Nikita, so nice
Hi.
to see you.
Yeah, great presentation. I'm curious, to your knowledge, do you know of the success of direct seeding of Chapin Mesa Milkvetch? Has anyone seen that to be helpful in augmenting the population?
Oh, good question, Nikita. It's to my knowledge, I think Sage might have put, if Sage is on, she might be able to answer that question. I think Sage might have put some in the seed mix that was put in when they redid the road, when they widened the road, Mesa Top Loop Road. And because seeds had been collected to put in the seed mix, and I think some seeds were in that seed mix, I think, but I don't know the success of it. It's a really good question. Yeah, and it's easy to collect a lot of seeds in years like we just had. So it'd be nice to be putting it in any of the seeds can last a long time. They're viable after many years. So collecting it and putting it in the seed mix is a good idea.
Thank you. Yeah, actually, yeah, that seed just got planted after the road construction this year, so maybe we'll get that answer soon.
That's great. That would be great. That'd be great. Nikita, for those of you who don't know Nikita, she is now the ecologist, and she's a restoration ecologist and fairly new to the park, but knows a lot about the plants.
Hey, Renee, I got a question for you.
Yeah.
If you know, I always kind of felt like that little teeny population out on Park Mesa was sort of a harbinger of the future because it burned in 1996.
Right.
So kind of see, it kind of seemed to portend what might be coming. And I'm wondering if you've been out there and at all in the last few years to see what that looks like.
No, the last time that was visited and data was collected off those plots, that people have been out there since then, but collecting plot data from that one that Lisa Floyd Hanna set up hasn't been redone for probably 10 years now. It should be redone. It'd be nice to look at that again. It was really hard to mark those corners were really hard to find. But last we looked, we know a lot more now. So it would be nice to go look at that again and see how well it's done. At first, it was so interesting because it was 1996, but turns out 1996, 2002, that's what 6 years apart, right? And so we'd get an additional 6 years worth of information, which could be interesting to see because I don't think they seeded Park Mesa. I don't know if they seeded or not, to tell you the truth. I don't know. Anybody on the call knows. But yeah, we should look at that again. Yeah, it'd be great.
What do you think things are looking like now for, do you have any predictions for the 2024 crop?
Yeah. We're having our winter started with a bang. It was great in December. It slowed down, but we just got snow today. So we got about 5 inches here. I expect the park got something similar. There's all the forecasters are predicting a wet winter. So we're hopeful that Dave, we could redo all your transects again this year. It's been 5 years since we've done them. Maybe you'll come help. Wouldn't that be cool? And yeah, so we'd love to, if it's a really good winter, we'd love to redo that whole sample set again, along with the demography plots. It's nice to have a wet winter. So now we know that we really don't need to monitor after a dry winter. The burned area acts very different than the unburned area now. Plants go dormant in the burned area, even in a wet year. Some plants remain dormant, which is fascinating. So the plants go dormant much more often in the burned area. So we're hopeful that we can at least keep those poker plots going also, because it gives us a lot of information about regeneration and mortality. Yeah, I find the plant is very adapted to drought, very adapted to fires. It's an amazing plant. It long lived is a blessing for us. I think some of the western wheatgrass may die back as the shrubs get more and more. That's my hope also. There's one other plot that has a hint that it might turn around, and it's the one plot that has hardly any western wheatgrass in it, even though it was seeded.
Renee Sage has a question here. She's stuck in her mute mode. Do you want me to read that for you?
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you, Dave.
She's curious about salvage and propagation as well. Says, I believe the limit to both is root depth, but can you speak to if any nurseries have tried to grow CMM and what is the survival rate of salvage?
Yeah. Thanks, Sage. So the Mesa Top Loop Road was widened, and we're not really sure, but somewhere like 500 plants were probably paved over, and so there was some salvaging that was done. So all the plants that really pretty much all the plants that we could see, the technicians and Beth was there. Anyway, they were salvaged and put into pots, and the idea was to transplant them, and many of them survived, even though the whole root system wasn't picked right. It's really hard to get that bottom root, and so they didn't get the bottom root when they salvaged them, the bottom of the root. They didn't get those secondary roots, but sometimes they popped up in the springtime, and they survived, and they kept watering them, and then it turned out that exactly what they all died. None of them survived. So I think you could salvage the plant. I think that's still a possibility, but the amount of work to dig down to 40, 50 centimeters to get those secondary roots, which it just looks like you have to get that secondary root, is a lot of work. And so I think salvaging sounds good. I think you could salvage maybe some, especially in different soil types that are super easy to dig in. You might be able to salvage more. But I don't think salvaging them is very good. So there's not any nurseries that have them. And more likely, the better thing to do is to grow them from seeds. It's really not that hard to sprout them. And so I do think that it would be easy to grow from the seeds, and you then would have the entire root, and you could plant those. Or better yet, just I think all you have to do is put seeds out there, and I don't think it really takes that much for a lot of years. A good seedling year, what's a good seedling year is spring moisture. April and May is really important for seedlings. And so since we've been doing the demography plots, we've had since 2015, there's been at least 4 or 5 years that have been pretty good seedling years. So it's not that hard for the seeds to sprout out in the wild. So spreading those seeds out could be a saving grace for us. I don't know if that helps or not, Sage, if that answers your question. Glad to see you're there. Sage was also prior to Nikita. Sage was in the same position that Nikita's in, and she was a big help and spent a lot of time with me. So, thank you, Sage.
Hey Renee, it's Savannah.
Hey, Savannah.
Also, it looks like Sage said thank you, so I think you did answer the question.
Awesome. Thanks, Sage.
I was going to ask more about the research that Ross did, and just whether or not you know why it's only at Chapin Mesa. Or I guess it sounded like there's a few little outlying areas it's also found. Is it recently speciated from Astragalus coultonii?
Yeah, so Ross, I don't think he's published it yet, but he's got a real nice report on it. And he looked at the outlying populations, Park Mesa and West Chapin Spur. They're not that far away, but they're still pretty hard to get to, and they are kind of far away. How they got there is a bit of a mystery. But when he collected the plant data for the DNA analysis, he found that those outlying populations have the same genetics that the main population does. And he did see that as you go further south and he got onto Ute Mountain Ute land, the genetics change a little bit as you go further south, but it's one big population. He thinks and it's quite diverse. He's like, it's a healthy genetics. And he thinks it's because it's insect pollinated, and the insects are moving that pollen around quite efficiently. And so it's a really solid species that way also, and doing well. It's not a new species from what I can tell from Ross. Coultonii is the closest. It's not very close in distribution, Coultonii. So it is closely related to it, but it's not close enough to even think that it's the same species. So he's confident that it's a good species and it's been around for a while. So the question becomes, why isn't it more widespread? Which is the $1 million question we have not answered. Why don't we find it on other mesa tops? They have deep soils. We have done some tests on soil, such as just north of where it's growing, and the organic matter is just terrible in some of those other sites. Checked it on Wetherill Mesa, terrible organic matter. So it may be driven more by soils than we think, and maybe that lack of organic matter. I'm just arm waving here, but it potentially you could take the seed and plant it in other places, but it may not do super well if you don't have a lot high organic matter.
Thanks. Yeah, it makes me think back when you guys were talking about the ancestral Puebloan influence. I don't know, it's totally throwing things out, but
yeah.
I usually like your ideas that are thrown around, so thanks.
Yeah. I wish one of the things we can do, there's a archaeologist, Kay, over there at Mesa Verde, and she's super interested in this plant. And I think they have a great seed collection from some of the archae sites, but they've just called it astragalus, and they've never gotten to species, but we know a lot more, and I think I could help with that. And so one of the things I'd love to do is just sit down with some archaeologists and see if we can't tie the two together a little better.
Oh, one other small question that came up was when you talk about the seedlings at good seedling years, what is the survival like on those?
Oh, yeah. They're terrible. It's awful.
Okay.
Yeah. It's not very good. In the burned, I think I don't have it in front of me, but we've probably got 50, I don't know if it's 50, 25 seedlings maybe that were in our poker pots. One survived. That's it. In the intact, it's still a low survival rate, but it's much higher survival rate. And so we now have 2015 was a really good cohort year, and we know what it takes for those seedlings to survive now. It takes actually 2 good winters. So they come up in April and May. They quickly put a deep root down, but it's still not deep and not robust enough to survive a dry winter. So if a dry winter comes the year after they sprouted, they die. They cannot survive that. And so you need a good winter right after they sprout. And if you have one good winter, that helps. But if your second winter, so you're 1 year old and you go through the second winter, if it's really dry, it will kill those 1 year old plants too. So they got to be 1 year old, but they can't get to be 2 years old if it's a dry winter. But by the time they're 3 years old, really 2 years old, they can survive a drought. And so it turns out that we've had some pretty serious droughts. So I think we've got the intact system, because it is cooler because of the trees being there producing that shade. I think the survival rate is maybe 3%, 4%. It's pretty low. But they live long. So if you're going to live to be 50 years old, you got 50 years to try to get a good recruitment going. So the plants that were seedlings in 2015, I think 2 of those plants, there's like 8 of them that survived, and 2 of them finally had fruit this year. So they're about 9 years old, I think. Everything happens slowly with Chapin Mesa Milkvetch.
Yes, very, very different from this skyrocket.
Yeah. So Savannah and I work on Pagosa Skyrocket, Pagosa Springs. Completely different strategy for surviving droughts. for progressive skyrocket. So it's always fascinating to go back and forth.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Good to see you.
You've got another one from Sage.
Oh, good. What do you got to say, Sage?
Let's see. I can't think of Western wheat the same ever again after my Mesa Verde work. Does anyone on the call know if Western wheat acts aggressively in most seed mixes? It's very commonly used on White River National Forest where I work now.
Oh my gosh, that's a great question. Can anybody answer that? And Sage, I will never think of Western wheatgrass the same ever again. I worked out in the prairie, and it was just such a positive plant to have. And then this happened, and I'm like, wow, I can't think of Western wheatgrass the same. So yeah, if anybody else can answer that question, I think it's still a great grass to put in seed mixes if it was there in the first place, and you want it to be a grassland. Yeah, but I would be careful with that plant, depending on where you're working. Did anybody? Oh yeah.
Jan says it creates monocultures in the Jeffco open spaces and Boulder open spaces in the home and in home gardens. So,
oh yeah.
I wonder about ecotypes of it too. Getting local seed variants might matter a lot for that thing, or local genetics.
I don't know, Dave. Because it's the root system. It's just an amazing plant. You've got those rhizomes that are close to the surface, and then you've got a deep root that can go down meters actually. And so it's really an efficient. It's an amazing plant. It's all about getting all the water. And so you could have different cultivars, but I think it would still have that same root system unless they made it a bunch grass.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's the root system that's the issue for creating monocultures.
Yeah.
There's not a blade of it. So just across the road. So there's a road, the fire's on one side of the road. You go across the road, what is it, 10 feet, 12 feet wide, into the intact system. That Western wheatgrass has been right across the road for a while, and it has never gotten into the intact Pinion-Juniper woodland system, which I find amazing. Nor has cheatgrass, right? There's not a blade of cheatgrass in there either.
Well, where do you think the closest Western wheat is that's supposed to be?
Oh, it's right at the bottom. It's right, that picture of the canyons of the bottomlands. It's natural. It's totally native down at Mesa Verde in those wet areas in the riparian, whatever you want to call those canyon bottoms. It's definitely common there, and that's exactly where you expect to be there. Oh, I do see something from Sage. Yeah, Sage, I agree. Now that you hesitate to seed any rhizomatous grasses, I totally, if your goal for seeding is to get your forest back, if it's a forest that you're trying to get back, then rhizomatous grasses probably won't help with that, because grasses can definitely outcompete certain species, in even shrubs, right? And so rhizomatous grasses can slow down succession if you're trying to get succession back into a woodland. If you want it to be a grassland or just erosion on the roadside, etc., I think rhizomatous grasses are fantastic. But if you're really trying to help succession after a fire, say, and that succession you're trying to get is to get it back into a woodland of some sort, rhizomatous grasses could be a challenge. It could slow it down. And we're not the only one that's found that. There's some other papers that people have seen that as well. Well, spruce fir forest. Wow. That they turned us into a ski run. That's what's getting seeded the most out there. Yeah, if it's going to stay a ski run, maybe it's a fantastic thing for that, right? If your goal is to keep it a ski run instead of having to keep cutting down the trees, Western wheatgrass could be super important at a ski run. That would be a great place to actually plant it, is in a ski run, because you don't want trees to come back in.
What have you seen with the seeded areas with any regrowth of PJ? Have you seen any seedlings for trees coming?
There are very few. There's a group of junipers that have come in right next to the Mesa Top Loop Road, close to Sun Temple, actually. There's probably 30 seedlings. They're now tall. They're 4 feet tall. They get that extra moisture runoff. So they managed, but where you get away from that road, I've seen one pinion seedling. It's actually close to soil moisture sensor that I have. And it's doing pretty well. It's right at the base of a dead tree, a burned tree. That's it, one. So it's slow to happen.
Do you think that's related to just like all the drought years we've had? Or is it just taking a while? Right,
I think, the natural succession, there are some folks that have worked on it. A guy named Erdman worked on it at Mesa Verde, succession after fire. And he found that it takes about 20 years. Basically, you need those shrubs as nurse plants. And it takes about 15 years for the shrubs to come back in. Once you get the shrubs in, then you can start to see seedlings of Pinion-Juniper. So you would expect to start seeing a Pinion-Juniper 20 years after a fire would be natural, and we're not seeing that. And that could be the new climate that we're experiencing, all the droughts. But there is recruitment going on in the intact system right across the road. We still see seedlings coming up of Pinion and Juniper. So the climate, at least in an intact system, is still regenerating those trees. So we know the overall climate is still okay, even though it's not okay in the burned area. Yeah, it's a bit of a mystery why we don't see more, but it's a lot of grass. You're turning it into a grassland. And so there's a big thing going on with transformation, with climate change. And should we transform a system, and do you want to transform it into a shrubland or a grassland? It's a really big, dicey question to get at. And we've got a great experiment going on, unintentional, but if you want to turn it into a grassland, this would be the time to do it. I think there's still a chance it could go back into a woodland. It's just going to take more than 20 years. I don't know. It's time will tell, I guess, on that one. Yeah.
Hey, I'm jumping back in here. We are at 7:30, so I'm gonna recommend that we all get a good night's sleep. But these have been great questions. I love everything that people are thinking about. I've learned a lot thinking in a restoration capacity here as well. Renee, now that I know you're also working on Pagosa Skyrocket, I think you just signed up for another lecture.
Well, that would be, we've got Savannah Smith on this call. So Savannah Smith, I think you've just been nominated.
Yes, you might have been. But thanks to everyone who came tonight. I'm really glad that we have these options now of meeting online and not having to drive through these big snowstorms. It's snowing here again in Durango. Thank you so much, Renee, for sharing your work and your wisdom with us. I'm so glad to have your presentation. And
it's my first name, Renee, RENEE .Rondeau, RONDEAU @colostate.edu.